Let's return to our top story, those marches being held in the US and indeed around the world in support of tighter gun controls. We're going to spend the next few minutes discussing this. Joining us live now, Steve Perry. He's an American teacher and founder of Capital Prep Schools in Harlem, New York. He joins us from Hartford, Connecticut. And on Skype, we have Steve Rogers from Nutley, New Jersey. He was a member of the Trump for President Advisory Board and a former member of the FBI National Joint Terrorism Task Force. Steve Rogers, coming to you first. Are you in favor of some change or no change?
Look, I'm in favor of reasonable regulations, like getting rid of the bump stock. But the problem we face here is that this is a mass effort to eliminate guns from law-abiding citizens. In my 38 years as a police officer who investigated violent crimes, I've always heard from the victims who would always tell me if I had a weapon to protect myself, I would have not had to face losing my very life. So there should be reasonable regulations, but I think there's enough on the books now for us to follow.
Steve Perry, it's about reasonable regulations and asking people to surrender their freedoms. I guess those freedoms protected by the Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment was passed in 1791. At that time, the military was only 16 years old, and as a nation, things were very, very different. I'd have been a slave. So simply referring to a time in which we had a Second Amendment without the context of today. What we know is that what we have in terms of regulations are not helping us. In fact, we have a generation of children who've grown up fearful of everything from gathering places, from churches to schools to concert venues. We have to push harder. There's no reason to have weapons of war in a time of peace in the United States of America.
Steve Rogers, what's wrong with eliminating guns?
Well, the city of Chicago has the strictest gun control laws in the country, as the city of Washington, D.C., and as a result, they have the highest rates of gun violence. Because if you eliminate guns from law-abiding citizens, then only the lawlessness will have guns. And look, we've got to make things, put things in perspective. The millions of people in
Steve
this country...
Rogers, can I just interrupt you for a second there? Dunblane, 1997, people were killed in a school. The British government passed legislation to curtail handgun ownership. Gun violence dropped. Australia brought in not dissimilar legislation. Gun violence dropped, decidedly dropped. It was a huge falling off a cliff drop. So your logic doesn't stand up.
It stands up here because we have millions of people who own guns in this country and millions of people who are law-abiding citizens. The difference between those countries and us is we have a constitutional right to bear arms. Now, I would say reasonable regulations, have background checks, make sure people who are deemed as mentally ill don't get their hands on those weapons. The bump stocks being eliminated, that's fine. But to outright
background checks would, first of all, a constitutional amendment, not even freedom of speech is unfettered. So simply because it's a constitutional amendment, it doesn't mean that it is not without some form of regulation and conscious movements. But just because we would have done background checks, it wouldn't have stopped Aurora. It wouldn't have stopped Parksville. It wouldn't have stopped quite a few places where children and adults have been murdered. We have to accept this notion, we can no longer accept this notion that if we take guns away, then there will only be lawlessness, as you've mentioned. There are a number of nations in which the decrease in gun violence has been profound. So we have to have a bigger conversation, and we have to have one in which we want to be safer as a nation, not to hold on to some far gone notion of what America used to be.
What do you say to victims of carjackings, victims of homicides, victims of being slaughtered by weapons? Even some of those children, which the media in this country did not talk about, said had someone in that school had a weapon, any school, to stop that gunman, no matter what school it was.
Someone did have a weapon. Someone did. Someone did have a weapon.
Steve Rogers, gentlemen, can I interrupt just for a second here, just for 1 second? Steve Rogers, that idea, surely you will come clean on this one. Nobody in America wants or accepts, and one has to say it's based on pure human logic here, the idea of arming teachers. I mean, you've spent what, 38 years? Okay, 38 years as 38 years. Just let me finish the point. 38 years as a policeman. You will therefore be well familiar with what, say, we saw that 11-year-old talking in Washington, cogent, very, very powerful speaker. A bullet going through an 11-year-old's body literally liquefies the internal organs. There's no easy or delicate or pleasant way to say that, but that is what happens. So the idea of arming teachers and turning them into what? Vietnam vet snipers, that will never work.
Look, I agree in the fact that I wouldn't want to see teachers armed. However, saying that, we do have community policing officers in schools. We do have well-trained school resource officers. In the cities, and I can tell you this, at least in this area, in the cities across this country, and I'm talking about a lot of African-American communities, they're way ahead of the game. They have metal detectors and they have armed security personnel. If you notice something, none of these shootings, at least as far as I know, have happened in schools in inner cities because they are smart. They have prepared to protect their children. So and that's a fact. So what we need to do is when we talk about
as an African American, who runs schools in the African American community, I'm telling you that did not stop. That actually, if we only had one guest on, yes, we would just sit and let you talk. But we have more than one, so I'm going to finish.
You're interrupting me.
What I'm saying is, you're talking about what I do. You're right, I'm interrupting you because we don't have all day. It's not just your segment.
Yeah,
so what
we're
doing is we're talking about what I do, which is educate African American children. And I'm telling you that we do not have a safer community because we have more guns. And neither did Fort Hood, who, by the way, had nothing but guns. It didn't stop someone from coming in and shooting up one of our military bases.
Okay,
so
Steve Rogers.
So having guns does
just
not
let me
stop
step
guns
in again,
from killing
gentlemen.
people.
Just for a second, Steve Rogers. Steve Perry is saying he wants a broader debate. You would be receptive to that as an idea. But why is it today we are not hearing on Twitter or on any social media platform from the NRA? If you look at Marco Rubio's tweets, however, I mean, he was taken to task big time, what, a week ago, 10 days ago. Marco Rubio's tweets, it should be tagged as sponsored by the NRA, given how much political money they've given the man.
Look, I can't speak for the NRA. I can only speak based on my experience and the people that I've spoken to throughout my 38 years. I was in a shooting. I don't know if your other guest had a gun pointed at him. I did. I was in a gun battle, and a lot of people could have died. And if someone, and it happened to be me and a few other police officers, weren't on the scene of that crime and was able to neutralize that suspect. So if you think you have the answers to violence and the answers to people. Let me finish now, okay? I hope to God you're never put in a position of some of the people I've seen where a gun was pointed at them and some died. Had they had a weapon, a legal weapon, a trained person, they would not be dead today.
Steve Perry, do you want to come back on that point?
So each time we make the argument that if someone... I do. Each time we make the argument that if someone else had had a gun, then we wouldn't be here. Fort Hood had guns. People still died first because the person who came in guns a-blazing. I want police officers. I want police officers to have guns, but I don't want teachers to have guns. I don't want principals to have guns. And in both Columbine and in Parksville, they had armed officers on the scene, and it didn't stop the carnage. So we have to have a broader. We have to have right. So we have to broader. Right. So
a homeowner, Steve, I agree with you. Just listen a minute. I agree with you when it comes to teachers and principals. What about the homeowner? What about the guy and the woman who goes hunting? They have a gun in their car and they're approached by a carjacker. Are you suggesting that homeowners in this country should not have weapons to protect themselves? Are you suggesting that all the people in Ohio who have open carry...
That my home... So here's a question. You asked me, am I suggesting that homeowners not have guns? I am saying that you can be safe without having a gun. I am safe,
Really?
and I don't have a gun.
Okay.
I have family members who are
Steve Rogers.
family members who are law enforcement officers,
Until
and we
someone
don't have
comes and
guns.
points a gun,
Gentlemen,
I hope that never.
gentlemen, both Steves, please. Last point to Steve Rogers. Anyone can come up with the kind of scenarios you're coming up with. A woman on her own facing rape, somebody, a house owner, the house is being burgled. What if what we are seeing today is a tipping point? What if America is transcending your president, Donald Trump, on the issue of gun legislation? What if America is transcending the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and it is your children who are doing it? They are driving this. The midterms are around the corner, and in 10 or 15 years' time, those 11-year-olds that we've been hearing from today, those powerful, powerful speakers, they will be congressmen and women. They might be senators.
Think about this. This is what we're seeing today. There are millions and millions of other young children who are in support of the Second Amendment, who are in support of their constitutional rights. This country has changed where the mainstream media is no longer being fair. You're fair. I've been on your station many times, and I've said it on the air over and over again. You guys are fair. But our media in this country is not fair. You're only hearing and seeing one side at this point. I think it's great that children have come out and paid tribute to the 17 in Florida. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. And I think it's good that they protest and express their views on issues. But let's get both sides. You're delivering on both sides. But I got to tell you, I'm sorry to say, they're not doing it here.
Gentlemen, we will have to leave it there because the clock has beaten us. Steve Perry and Steve Rogers, thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.